Welcome to Episodes of History. With me, I'm Z. Please join me as we explore Episode 1, Cleopatra, the Last Pharaoh. Born January of 69 BC to Pharaoh Ptolemy VII and Cleopatra V of Egypt, the most famous bearer of the name entered the political stage that she would continue to inhabit for millennia after her tragic suicide. Her spectacular journey into history was fraught with war, political turmoil, scandalous rumor, and strife. She handled it all with great poise and strove to emulate the goddess Isis come to life as she portrayed herself to be to her people. Cleopatra may have been one of the most famous Egyptian women. However, she was no more Egyptian than the women who would later portray her in film and on stage. She was actually descendant of a Greek Macedonian dynasty that started with Ptolemy I, the most trusted of Alexander the Great's lieutenants. This Greco-Roman period marked the end of the Persian rule over Egypt. The Persians, who came from what is now Iran, had been defeated by Alexander, who conquered Egypt in 332 BC, founding the new capital city of Alexandria, where our heroine was later born. Cleopatra did not take the weight of her responsibility to her people lightly. She made great efforts in her youth to study and understand the Egyptian culture. She was the only one of her family line to become fluent in the Egyptian language in the 300 years they ruled over the country. She studied philosophy, rhetoric, and oratory with a tutor. She was also a gifted linguist. In addition to her native Greek and acquired Egyptian, she also spoke Ethiopian, Arabic, Syrian, Median, and Parthian, reportedly speaking nearly every major language of the time. She undoubtedly also read Greek, Egyptian, and Latin, perhaps more. Though not Egyptian by birth, her studies of the Egyptian gods, culture, and ethnic sensibilities made her the most empathizing of queens, and beloved by her people as evidenced by the numerous temples and memorials to her and her successful rule, leading her people through famine, drought, wars, and a blending of two cultures into one Egypt, thriving together. As her rule continued, she was often painted by Roman propaganda as a debauched temptress who used her sex appeal as a political weapon. However, as we continue to learn more about the time in which she ruled, we can easily see this is nothing more than rumor. In fact, Cleopatra could have been one of the more prudent women in power. She was married twice before her liaisons with Roman men, but it seems likely that she only slept with those two men in total. Her original marriages being to her younger brothers in order to secure the throne for her family dynasty. Both of her Roman relationships, with Julius Caesar as well as Mark Antony, appear to have started as a planned strategic move rather than that of lust or passion. For those times that she did seem to use sex in order to achieve a goal, it is easy to see that it was a well-thought-out strategy that shows her unparalleled prowess as a strategist, thinker, and political tactician. Our first example being in 48 BC, when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria during Cleopatra's feud with her brother and first husband, Ptolemy VIII, which had caused her to flee the city and her throne for fear of assassination. Knowing her brother's troops would thwart any attempt she made at reaching the Roman general, Cleopatra employed an interesting bit of strategy. She had herself wrapped in a carpet and smuggled into the city, straight into Julius Caesar's personal quarters inside of her palace. A tale that many feel is sensationalized in itself, but is evidenced even on hieroglyphic rock carvings of the time. Caesar was impressed by both the sight of the young queen in her royal dress as well as her boldness, and the two quickly became both allies and lovers. Many historians and authors quote this instance as proof that Cleopatra used her body in order to keep her grasp on power, as within the year, the threat of her younger brother was quashed by his drowning death in battle with Caesar's troops on the Nile, as well as a line of succession for her family dynasty secured by her son, Ptolemy XV Caesar, who she nicknamed Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar, in case there was any confusion as to his powerful parentage. What many of those who tell this tale seem to leave out is that the deal was far from a one-sided damsel in distress rescued by the brave general. Caesar needed Cleopatra's impressive wealth to fund his armies and resources, thus gaining his power back in Rome. Then, by producing an heir with the man who was Rome, Cleopatra successfully secured both her family line and the militant protection of her country, as Egypt was now a literal son of Rome. Cleopatra and her son spent time the following year in Rome with Caesar, being treated as royal guests, and she, his Egyptian queen, a very public mistress. The married Roman even had statues erected in her honor throughout the city, going as far as to ordering one built in the sacred Temple of Venus, causing enraged tongues all over the city to spin rumor of the scandalous power couple. She was enchanting, but today most historians believe that it was her skills as a conversationalist and a strategist that made her so bewitching to be around, not necessarily her physical beauty. After Caesar's death during this visit in March of 44 BC, Cleopatra returned to Egypt to rule with her next younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, until his sudden death by poisoning in that same year, which created an opening for her 3-year-old son to conveniently become her co-ruler, if nothing but in name. In 41 BC, Cleopatra found herself in need of renewed guarantee from Rome of their continued support now that the security of Julius was long gone. Enter Mark Antony, a man who she had met once in her youth as a debauched drinker. He was now a powerful war hero in Rome with much of the conquered East under his yoke, making him one of the 2 most influential men of the time, second only to his prior war buddy turned rival, Octavian. Luckily for our heroine, the Roman triumvir has just summoned her to a meeting at Tarsus. Our queen is said to have arrived on a shimmering golden barge adorned with purple sails and rowed by oars made of silver. Cleopatra is dressed in the finest linens and made to look like the goddess Aphrodite as she sits beneath a gilded canopy, fanned by servants fashioned as cupids. Antony, who considered himself to be the embodiment of the Greek god Dionysus, was instantly enchanted, the sweet-smelling incense that burned from the barge alluring him to her presence. What followed was 10 years of grand parties, dinners, a little warring, and most of all, drinking. In fact, Cleopatra and Antony created their own secret drinking club called the Inimitable Livers, seemingly as a group to honor the god Dionysus, but likely as an excuse to drink and enjoy life together in the lavish comforts her extensive riches afforded them. Even to the extent of that one time she famously drank a priceless pearl cocktail. Cleopatra maintained this relationship with the Roman leader and even gave birth to his twins, Alexander Helos, meaning sun, and Cleopatra Selene II, meaning moon. In the same year, his legal wife in Rome, Octavia, whom just so happened to be Octavian's sister, gave birth to another son. Awkward. The first major turning point against the couple occurred in 35 BC when Octavia took a trip to visit her husband Antony. She brought with her vital supplies, travel animals, clothing, money, armor, and elite soldiers of the Parthian Guard, who served as personal guards and intelligence agents for the Roman emperors. Antony accepted and received her gifts, but did not see her, and even went as far as to having a messenger send her back to Rome, which, as you can imagine, was seen as a bit of an insult to both her and her powerful brother, who seized the opportunity to paint even more red onto Antony's once proud name. As their time in Egypt went on, Antony continued to indulge the Eastern culture, even beginning to dress and emulate that which surrounded him. Octavian took advantage of this dip in popularity with the Roman people to start rumors that Antony was nothing more than a weak former general under the spell of a wicked queen. This all continues to build against Cleopatra and Antony, but she has such perceived security in her tactical movements as they had been with Caesar, that she truly believes their combined strength could conquer the world. In 33 BC, Antony and Cleopatra held an extravagant triumphal ceremony in Alexandria to celebrate Antony's annexation of Armenia, which was perceived by the people as theatrical, arrogant, and to reveal a hatred of Rome. The ceremony was reminiscent of a Roman triumph, but took place in a foreign land. There were 2 thrones of gold made for Antony and one for Cleopatra, both of whom were dressed in the garb befitting the gods they seek to emulate, with lower-seated thrones for their sons. The purpose of this lavish ceremony was to confirm the queen's power and to distribute territories and kingdoms to Antony and Cleopatra's children. Antony declared that Cleopatra was the queen of Egypt, Cyprus, Libya, and Syria, and to their children went Armenia, Media, Parthia, Phoenicia, Syria, and Cilicia. This move was one that Antony would not recover from. Come 32 BC, Octavian makes a grand move in Rome, walking into a vault in the Temple of Vesta to retrieve Antony's will, reading it aloud to the masses of the Senate, while famously not allowing anyone else to do so. In the will, Octavian insists that Antony has listed his children that he fathered with Cleopatra as his heirs, and that, at the time of his death, he was to be taken back to Alexandria and buried with Cleopatra. This lit the flame of treason that Antony wanted to move the capital itself from Rome to Alexandria. Octavian magnified and distorted the embarrassing content of Antony's will, which was put in stark contrast with Octavian's proper Roman behavior. In the end, garnering Roman support for Octavian against an evil, bewitching foreign queen, who was, by all accounts, able to take down even the most powerful of men with her seductive powers. Those fabled seductive powers have been spoken of for centuries and historically put to play in 1891, portrayed by Sarah Benedart in a melodrama written by Sardou, with a memorable death scene which enlisted the help of 2 live garter snakes in place of that famous deadly asp. The earliest film depiction of Cleopatra was a silent movie from 1917 starring Theda Barba, which, even in the silent era, placed her firmly as one of the industry's earliest sex symbols after portraying the exotic Queen of Queens. At the time, it was the most expensive film to ever be made. It cost the studio $500,000, approximately $11 million in 2023. Topped only by the most remembered iteration of the Pharaoh story, the 1963 film Cleopatra, starring none other than the young, violet-eyed Elizabeth Taylor. The role would make her the highest-paid actress in Hollywood. This supersized production, which lasts over 4 hours and remains the most expensive film of all time, nearly bankrupted the studio at $44 million, a cool $431 million in today's dollar. Proving even more so how these studios were willing to take such high-stake risk on a story that is proven to last the test of time. That romantic adventure between Cleopatra and Mark Antony continued to cause the same salacious-type rumor mill in modern day when Elizabeth fell in love with her on-screen Antony, Richard Burton. And the whirlwind affair between the two became one of the most scandalous in cinema history. Something I believe the 2 ancient lovers would have found rather amusing, given their shared love of the theatrical. But no matter the number of times a tale is told, or how much gold is laid in front of them, it always ends the same way. 31 BC. Antony took 400 warships with Cleopatra as his co-general and headed out to war with Octavian yet again, only to misstep, placing his fleet in a harbor with one narrow entrance, ending in a locked siege by Octavian's forces. After nearly half a year, the battle was finally underway. Cleopatra herself commanded several dozen Egyptian warships. However, given Antony's reduced strength, low supplies, reduced manpower due to disease, and Octavian's immense numbers, Antony and Cleopatra were forced into deserting back to Egypt. Spending the next 6 months trying to send envoys to Octavian to settle the war, it seemed as though maybe the couple had finally begun to see the writing on the wall. Octavian was having none of their peace talks, and in 30 BC, he sailed into Alexandria to meet with what little remained of Antony's navy and forces. The sight of the approaching armies tossing the defending troops into an almost immediate mass desertion. Now, with the invading armies at the city gates, men gone, and false messages that his queen was already dead, a desperate and destroyed Antony fell onto his sword. When word of this reached the hidden away and very much alive Cleopatra, she sent for him immediately. He was carried to her mausoleum and died there in her arms, his last wish simply being one more glass of wine. Shakespeare would have us believe that he rattled off a glorious sonnet to his lover before taking his final breath, but it's far more likely that he was in too much pain from his wounds and simply bled out. Now, her champion gone, kingdom captured, and all power lost to her, Cleopatra then resolves herself not to suffer the same humiliation her sister had at the hands of Julius Caesar. She would not be paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy of Octavian's victory. Now, this is where the flair of storytelling and lost historical accounts mesh deeply. It is said that she washed, dressed in her full royal garb, complete with finest jewelry, ate one final meal, and had word sent to Octavian with instruction to have her buried next to Antony. Upon receiving the note, Octavian sent men immediately to investigate. She was found in her mausoleum, lying lifeless on a golden couch, her 2 servants dead and dying beside her. She was 39 at the time of her death, having ruled Egypt for more than 20 years. But are the stories we know from hundreds of years of retelling true? Was she killed by a poisonous asp that she held dramatically to her breast as she cried out for her lost love? Did she drink a concoction brewed by her servants for a merciful end? Was she actually murdered? The sad reality is we may never know the facts surrounding her death, especially since her tomb has never been discovered. While some experts believe that Cleopatra actually had a tomb for herself in Alexandria, others believe that the famous couple were entombed together in the Tapasaris Magna Temple, west of the city. One such expert, Egyptologist Kathleen Martinez, has dedicated her life to finding the lost queen. Her team has completed nearly 2 decades of excavation at the Tapasaris site, with both traditional methods as well as bringing in new technology such as radar scans that are able to penetrate the ground and search for hidden cavities. One of these scans has even revealed a 30-foot room deep underground. Kathleen and her team will continue their research and may be close to finding more answers. It is with these efforts, as well as those with the Scan the Pyramids mission, led by Cairo University and the French Hip Institute, that will bring more and more information about the ancient time in which these pharaohs ruled. Although, even with the monumental effort spanning years of archaeological research, it is possible we may never find her tomb, with even less evidence existing after a 5th century earthquake destroyed her palace and sent it sliding into the Mediterranean, rendering the world Cleopatra knew largely invisible. The research continues into Cleopatra to this day, with countless artifacts, hieroglyphs, and histories combed through, with new information coming to light the deeper we go. We may never know the full story of Cleopatra VII, but thanks to advancing technologies and new minds entering the field each year, we will never stop learning about the last pharaoh of Egypt.